Live from Naples, this is The Morning Break with Jane Ritter.
Hello everyone, and it's really nice to be back. This morning I have a very special guest, Nazreen Majid. She's the editor and an author of one of the chapters from Essential Subject Knowledge for Primary Teaching. And I'm very, very excited to be chatting with her this morning.
Live from Naples, this is The Morning Break with Jane Ritter on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Oh, and it's really, really nice to be back. I'm really looking forward to talking with my guest this morning. A little bit of information about Nazreen. Nazreen has been an educator for over 25 years, and her career started in primary schools. In addition to being a class teacher, she worked as an advanced skills teacher, supporting curriculum development and professional learning in schools. Nazreen's career in higher education includes working with pre-service teachers to develop their skills in climate change and sustainability education, and developing primary mathematics knowledge and understanding. Her current role at UCL is on the MA Education program. MA in Education, pardon me. Nazreen is an Associate Fellow for UCL's Centre for Climate Change and Sustainability Education. This morning, we will be talking not only about the book published by Sage Publications, but we'll also be talking about Nazreen's career. And if you are interested, obviously, in following this up further, the book is a fantastic resource, particularly for a trainee teacher. As a trainee teacher, you've got a huge amount to grapple with when it comes to developing expertise. And there's so many suites within the primary national curriculum, and subject knowledge can't really be developed in isolation. It has to be related to curriculum. Nazreen will be talking about the book as we continue our conversation, but just so you know, it's a great resource and it can really, really support you as a teacher. So, without any further ado, I've given a brief introduction to Nazreen, but she's going to tell us a lot more about her work.
And good morning.
Good morning, Jane.
Lovely to have you here with me, Nazreen. I've spoken a little bit about you, but I think it would be really nice for our listeners to hear a little bit more about what you do.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I'm delighted to kind of be sharing my work. So I've been in education for 25 years. I trained as a primary school teacher many years ago, more years than I care to remember. That's been my trajectory in education. I then went on to work as an advanced skills teacher. So that was quite early on in my career, where I developed kind of real kind of teaching and learning skills, not just to develop those ideas with my pupils in school, but actually mainly with teachers to support them with their professional development opportunities, etc. as well. So that was quite a powerful opportunity for me to go into leadership, but not sort of the traditional ideas of leadership in schools as well. My journey took me to an international school. So I worked at British School Jakarta for 2 years. That was the most amazing kind of enriching creative experience for me, where I worked with a real diverse range of students, not just in the primary setting actually, but also in secondary. So I taught secondary geography whilst I was there as well. And you know, there's been little kind of episodes throughout that have enabled me to kind of develop my craft as a teacher. So I I specialised in mathematics, essentially in the majority of sort of my career as well.
Yeah.
And you know, when I came back from my international school, I decided to do an MA in Education and International Development at UCL, and that was essentially the springboard for me to pursue an academic career. And I started at University of Reading, training teachers in mathematics, pre-service teachers for mathematics primary. And through that, my love of really developing expertise, developing that kind of real critical thinking and that deeper level of insight was born, really, you know, and it was sort of galvanized as well. And University of Reading is quite an innovative space for climate education. And I decided to, you know, bring my undergraduate course, which was a geography course, you know, together to work in the climate change and sustainability space. And the university was doing an initiative across the university, interdisciplinary ideas around kind of developing climate change and sustainability education. So I got involved in that, and that sort of led me to kind of the next phase of my career, really.
Yeah.
And that's where I am today, you know, talking about a chapter that I've written in a subject knowledge book that I edited, which I'm really proud of as well. So,
what motivated you to work on this edition of the Primary Teachers Now series?
So I think it's really important to kind of look at the current context. So we're living in a time where knowledge is seen in a different way. So we've got a range of new lenses to kind of really think about knowledge constructs and knowledge ideas. And I really wanted to kind of have an opportunity to bring together experts. And I had some brilliant colleagues who worked on the various chapters that we worked on. To really kind of critically analyze our curriculum content and look at it from the focus of pre-service teachers, but actually how that progresses into their early careers and beyond as well, but also bringing in the critical context of our time. So thinking about decolonizing the curriculum. That's a really important aspect of kind of critical pedagogies, where we need to look at how we frame those conversations, and not just in a kind of surface level way, for example, of bringing diverse texts into a classroom for language learning and language teaching, but actually looking deeper into those ideas in a more sophisticated way, and perhaps looking at it from each subject lens as well, which is what this book has aimed to do in each chapter as well. But in addition to that, the sort of current climate breakdown that we're having, and how teachers want to think about that and frame those conversations. So this book was also an opportunity to add that level of knowledge in and pedagogical content knowledge into the book, so that when anybody picks up the book and looks at a chapter, they'll see layers of those ideas embedded into the chapters to support them to start having those conversations with their colleagues, thinking about their planning, and really sort of honing in on it in a systematic and connected way as well.
I think it's extremely useful, and particularly for pre-service teachers. So obviously subjects are vast, and what do I really need to focus on? How did you define what was essential and what wasn't?
So one of the key frameworks that I use was really thinking about what knowledge constructs look like and how we define those ideas. So from a teacher perspective, when a teacher comes in at the starting point of a training program, we think about this notion of pure subject knowledge. So this pure knowledge that an individual needs to have in one particular area of the curriculum. Primary teaching is unique because you need to become jack of all trades, and you become a master of one or two, but you do have to learn various elements of that purity of knowledge. So, you know, with mathematics, for example, you know, you really look at how children kind of form those connections with mathematical ideas, for example, and how that builds over time. So that's kind of the purity of the knowledge that I felt was important to kind of add within the context, that foundational knowledge ideas. Then you have to kind of frame the conversation around what the current framework teachers are using to deliver the curriculum content, and how schools are developing their curriculum content as well. And that's from our national curriculum provision and the aims of the national curriculum, but also the programs of study that each teacher has to use to develop their kind of, you know, approach, and how it progresses over time and how those skills are progressed over time as well. So that was a key component of the book as well, in terms of how we looked at that. And there are, you know, worked examples that colleagues have put in there as well. And then we also looked at sort of how you do it, you know, so it's not about kind of just telling you, it's showing you how you do those ideas, giving you those good examples that you can take but actually build on as well. That's what every you know, teacher training institution does, and we felt that, you know, it was important to kind of give those worked examples to kind of look at how that builds on. And as I mentioned before, the next layer was really looking at the pressing issues of our time, and bringing in that kind of critical pedagogy of kind of decolonizing the curriculum and what that looks like within each subject. I think it's a unique book in framing those conversations, but also looking at sort of, you know, climate change and sustainability education, and using some of the ideas that I've worked on with colleagues.
Well, let's talk about this a bit more, because your work with climate change and sustainable education has gained recognition not only in the UK but also on an international level. And perhaps it might be nice just to hear a little bit about what are the essentials for pre-service primary teachers.
So one of the key pieces of work that I've done with colleagues at the University of Reading was developing a pre-service teachers framework for initial teacher education. And within that, we really looked very carefully at the different kind of layers of ideas that we needed to have. So we looked at the notion of knowledge and what knowledge looks like within the context of climate change and sustainability education. One of the reasons why we added that was because it's teachers actually talk about the fact that they want to develop climate change and sustainability education, but they don't have the knowledge. They feel fearful of the vast kind of, you know, IPCC reporting that comes through, and they'd like to sort of, you know, have that broken down into bite-sized pieces to kind of make sense to them, first of all, and then how that would make sense to their pupils as well. So those ideas are embedded within the chapter, and they are built upon. Another key aspect is really thinking about sort of attitude, values, and behaviors. So you know, as individuals, our value system develops over time, and how we see the world is influenced by our value system. So it's really important to kind of critically examine that. And that's where the kind of critical pedagogical lens comes in, to look at climate justice, for example. What it might mean to me would be different to what it might mean to you or anybody else. So it's really important to kind of think about those ideas and highlight how to frame those conversations. So having debates, for example, and thinking about a key idea and having those critical debates is important. And then a final piece of the puzzle in terms of looking at what kind of ideas is the competencies and capabilities. And these were adopted and taken from the UNESCO competencies for education for sustainable development. And we really thought about sort of this notion of the ways of thinking, sort of this critical thinking, system thinking, the anticipatory thinking, you know, what might happen in the future if we do this, if we change our carbon footprint, what might happen. And in addition to that level of kind of competencies, we also looked at participating, so how individuals can participate and make change within their own sort of communities of schools, etc., and ways of being. So this notion of kind of self-awareness and this normative ideas of how they see the world, and therefore how that awareness helps them to kind of ripple out their ideas into their practice and in their communities as well. But in addition to that, we really wanted to kind of get you know, trainees to think about how those ideas would be kind of framed with pupils as well. So thinking about sort of this notion of positionality, as I've mentioned earlier, thinking about sort of climate justice, that's a key core component, because we really felt that intersected and sort of, you know, this whole idea of how we see the world and actually how climate justice sort of comes through in all aspects of our lives. And then one of the key ideas of building agency with teachers, but also with young people, is this notion of action. So what can you do at a local level that will have an impact, you know, on a wider scale as well? So those were some of the key ideas and thought processes that when we initially thought about, and then we kind of, you know, added it to this framework and thinking, and the details are in the chapter.
Absolutely.
To provide.
I mean, it's a lot easier to do that in secondary.
Yeah.
And primary, what kind of essentials could we have an example of the kind of classroom essential that they
so
really...
one of the ways that children can really think about sort of climate justice issues, for example, is showing imagery. So you could have two images of a weekly shop, for example. So it could be you know, different parts of the world, and we can start a conversation around what that means, you know. So it could be a weekly shop from Germany and a weekly shop from in Morocco, for example. And we can have quite lengthy conversations around sort of what objects they can see, what items they can see, and then you can start sort of thinking about, okay, so how much do you think that costs, you know, and how much do you think it costs in Morocco, and then having those comparisons. And then we can drill deeper down into that information, and then talk about the ideas of okay, so now let's go and have a look at some data sets of the carbon footprint that an average household in Germany might produce to an average household in Morocco might produce. So this information is quite easily available. So, for example, in the Overshoot data sets on their website, that they're really freely available, and then you can actually do some comparisons within that. And then actually, if you're going drilling even deeper into that, so this will be kind of year 5, year 6 level work, you could look at the idea of actually what's happening in Germany at the moment. What are some examples of how the climate emergency is affecting people in Germany? And we can compare that with what's happening in Morocco, for example. So that's a nice worked example of the kind of ideas that you can do with simple imagery. However, another really key way of developing climate literacies and sustainability education with pupils is actually using the resources that are on the school grounds. So, for example, at the moment, I'm working with UCL Centre climate change and sustainability education in developing some professional development programs.
I was just about
for.
I'll let you keep going.
For primary mathematics specifically. And one of the key areas that we're focusing in on is kind of connecting with nature and thinking about kind of biodiversity. So these are really fantastic ways that you can engage young pupils. You can take pupils for a nature walk, for example, around the school grounds and get them to look at kind of shapes and ideas sort of from a mathematical lens, for example. But, you know, to go deeper into that, we're developing an idea of creating a project for increasing biodiversity within a patch of land within the school grounds. And that's going to be a really interesting piece of work because it's going to kind of, you know, take an area that looks a little bit sad and it needs kind of just a little bit more invigoration to it and life to it. And the children are going to kind of, you know, really be the curriculum developers in thinking about how they can use data to kind of, you know, think about what they need to do to increase biodiversity. So there'll be lots of conversations about what biodiversity means from the flora fauna perspective. They'll have an expert coming in to talk about that. But in addition to that, they'll look at local flora that needs to kind of come back into that particular area, for example, as well. And that's a kind of year-long project, but it's a really good example of how children in primary schools can really think about, first of all, through that project, you're developing your mathematics skills. You know, that's kind of one of the big aims of the actual module. So it needed to be in there. So it was really important. But actually, what another really important component is around talk and discussion. So how can talk develop this idea of kind of deeper mathematical thinking, but also thinking about kind of sustainability and biodiversity within the school grounds as well. So that's just one worked example that I've given away, which we haven't published yet, but it's a good way of kind of, you know, framing that conversation as well.
It's also wonderful for the learners themselves to have, you know, to take ownership of a space and look after it. It's extremely important because some learners don't have access. I mean, they might live in flats or, you know, they don't have a garden. And it's a really idea.
Absolutely, and it links in with the aspiration of the government's National Education Nature Park. So that's really looking at the spaces in the school grounds as a national estate for biodiversity, for increasing biodiversity, which is really exciting. And actually, the school that I'm working with, I did a BERA funded project with them that sort of linked around kind of nature connectedness as through the arts to support pupil well-being. So it kind of it is a sort of, you know, follow on in a way for some of those pupils, not all of those pupils, but that school has a living bee sculpture in there as a result of the biodiversity project, you know. And they kind of came up with that idea and that evolved and they built that, you know, bee sculpture, and they use it as part of the legacy of that project to do some really cool curriculum stuff that they developed, you know, and everything. So there are so many ways that primary schools can really build those ideas as well. Just finally, one idea that is quite, you know, quite a good one that links in the Sustainable Development Goals is that to link a Sustainable Development Goal with each year group. So, for example, you know, Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate action, you could link that to year 3 or year 4, whatever, and then there could be links to curriculum content with that as well.
Actually, I had a question because obviously, I mean, pardon my ignorance, because here, obviously in Italy, we work towards the the SDGs.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask you, how does the UK curriculum fit with that? Is it the same, or are they used, or?
No. So in the national curriculum, there is very little mention of climate change. So it's mentioned in geography and in science. So I think there is, that's part of the issue why teachers feel quite anxious about how they need to teach it, because the guidance isn't there.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, the Sustainable Development Goals aren't explicitly embedded within the framework of the national curriculum, and that's something that is an area of need. So one of the ways that actually, like I mentioned with the example earlier, one of the ways that Sustainable Development Goals can be built in is actually the schools having the autonomy to do that themselves. And schools are working on that, but actually there needs to be a collective effort and an approach that kind of sustains it as well, rather
We've
than
only got to 2030 to get there.
Indeed.
It's creeping up quite quickly.
It is. Yeah.
You've given some really positive examples. In your experience, what challenges do educators commonly face? I think it's sort of what we're talking about now, when they're integrating it into existing frameworks.
So one of the key things is lack of knowledge, so lack of subject knowledge. So not having the insight or understanding how elements of climate change and sustainability education can be built into an area of the curriculum. So, for example, there are at the Centre for Climate Change and Sustainability Education, we're also developing the English content at the moment. So my colleague is developing the English content as well. And when you're teaching the English curriculum in primary education, you might not think there are links to how to build that in, but actually, persuasive writing and kind of, that sort of embedding ideas into sort of children's literature, that you can take an extract from a piece of work and actually look at what's happening within that context, and are there any elements in there that can give us some information about what's happening to the climate in that space and time as well. So there are some really that's part of the challenge, that teachers don't have the kind of the resource available to them in order to teach it effectively. I think another area that teachers mention is linked to that is having really carefully curated professional development opportunities. So teachers in the recent survey that the Centre for Climate Change and Sustainability Education at UCL did, teachers actually, explicitly talked about the fact that they would love to be teaching it in a systematic and connected way, but they just simply haven't had the training, to do it at pre-service level and actually in service as well. So that's another challenge that they face. And one of the final challenges that keeps coming up over and over again is this idea of time, so and actually the kind of the denseness of the curriculum content and where can they fit it in. So in a way, the conceptualization at the moment for many teachers is that it's an add-on rather than an integrated component.
Shouldn't be.
Yeah, so that's what we're trying to build on within the different professional development programs that we're developing for Teaching for Sustainable Futures at UCL to support teachers to look at, okay, well, we've given an example of history, but that actually can link in with many aspects of everyday sort of thinking that you do with your pupils, and how to build those ideas further as well.
Wonderful. I think we will just take a quick break there and have a message from our sponsors, and we will be right back with Nasreen. And welcome back. I was
Thank
just
you.
thinking during the break about the similarities that I'm finding here in Italy. I was in Bolzano a couple of weeks ago for a conference, and I just touched on a few of the SDGs. And at the end of the workshop, the teacher actually said, "Thank you so much for covering that, because we just don't do enough of it in." And this is, I mean, it's English language teaching, and there's so much that you can sort of use, but not enough. I don't think not enough is being done here as well. So we will probably be looking to you for
I
advice
think
and support.
there's lots of ways we can incorporate them in, and I think that's what we're aiming and striving to do.
And I suppose the question that I was going to ask you is, what innovative teaching methodologies or programs have you developed? It's obviously work in progress. What about student engagement?
Yeah, so I think that's an area that can only be thought through and done through kind of embedding and thinking about kind of research ideas and how research kind of informs that level of thinking. So children are really engaged with this work, you know. So my BERA project kind of demonstrated how children really want to think about the environment in a connected way, and what that looks like for them as well. So it was really interesting at the starting point of that project, where we collected some pre-data and post-data to kind of do some comparative work. And you know, children were not going out in the environment enough, and not sort of engaged with it at that level. However, you know, a really simple starting point with that particular project was a nature walk, and what that felt like. And they took their iPads with them. They took photographs of anything that they wanted to close up from a mouse's perspective, for example, or from a bird's perspective, which would have been quite challenging, but we got them to imagine what that might look like as well. So actually the way we connect with nature is through our senses, and actually through how we feel about what we see and what that means to us, and through our conversations with an individual as well. So that level of work with the children is actually really, really important to start to get them to think about how you know, how we're connected to the earth, and therefore, you know, what we need to do to kind of take care of it for the long-term future as well. So that's one element in terms of kind of the biodiversity element as well. Another area that children perhaps really struggle with is this thinking around consumption and what that might look like as well. So I know schools have been doing this for years in terms of looking at kind of recycling practices, and children are really used to that. And that's a fantastic way of starting those conversations about kind of you know, the 3 R's as well. But you know, there's more to it as well. So thinking about I don't know, I'd like everybody to bring an item of clothing in, you know, their favorite item of clothing, and we're going to have a conversation about that. So actually through that, you can weigh the piece of clothing, you know, and then you can kind of look at, okay, well, let's go onto this website and work out the carbon footprint of this piece of this item of clothing. And there are sort of child-friendly sites that I've been researching, because I'm putting that into my work. That you can use, and then we can kind of also then kind of say, okay, well, let's think about how much water is being used to produce this item as well. So again, that's a really good conversation about what impact has that had locally where this item was produced, in order for you to kind of consume it. So again, sort of thinking about individual kind of consumption and the impact that we're having is a good way of kind of really starting that conversation from a personalized approach as well. So children really want to develop those ideas. Children actually feel quite anxious about what they see on a day-to-day basis in terms of the climate breakdown. And, you know, as you know, this notion of climate anxiety is very much kind of here now. But if we work with children and get them to look at climate change and sustainability as an embedded part of curriculum content, then that's the way forward in them acknowledging and actually accepting the fact that this crisis is here. It's going to stay, actually going to be part of my future as well. And I can be the change maker. I can be the innovator. I can actually, be part of the solution as well. So, and I think that's a really powerful thing. Another sort of good example.
On so many. I mean, clothing is one of the consumption of clothing are things that if we start talking about it from a very early age, we can make a huge difference. I sort of think when they're going to become teens, and fast fashion it's not
absolutely. And there are opportunities for schools to kind of engage in carbon literacy projects with their pupils as well. So this school that I'm a partner with as part of the UCL's school partnership with the Climate Centre, the children in year 4, they all have carbon literacy training through the Green Schools project. And that's a wonderful way of them looking at, for example, a sandwich and the carbon footprint of that sandwich, etc. So these are sort of real examples, everyday examples. And there's literacy involved in that. There's mathematics involved in that. There's so many different ideas involved in that as well. And my kind of real ambition is to get children to think of the school as a system and how everything connects up, how the community connects up, how the kind of natural landscape connects up to enable this habitat to work in a symbiotic kind of way, in order for children to kind of continue to develop those skills for the future as well.
Very much, yeah, and it's sort of linked to the well-being community as well. There's quite a lot of crossover there.
Yeah.
How do you navigate the balance between scientific rigor and age-appropriate educational content when you?
So that's a really tricky idea, and that's where teachers actually, when they give us qualitative feedback on surveys, they actually mention that as well. So one of the key ways to develop knowledge with teachers is taking the IPCC reporting, which is kind of, the gold standard of what the information out there is around climate change, and breaking it down. So the UNESCO it's gone blank. So UNESCO's Office for Climate Change, excuse me. They have created some fantastic resources breaking down the science and making it sort of breaking it down and making it accessible absolutely for teachers. And that's something that I draw upon when I work with teachers to really get them to think about, okay, well, this is what they're talking about in terms of the climate breakdown and the flooding that's happened. And a real lived example is the flooding that happened in Pakistan a couple of, last year, etc. But how do we break it down for a group of year 6 pupils? Let's have a look at this resource in order for us to kind of, think about localized information within your school kind of, catchment. To think about those ideas as well. So then we can look at data sets of rainfall locally, and then use that information to think about the projection of potentially flooding in that particular area as well. So that's just one example of how teachers can look at that in a more sort of broken down way as well.
Yeah. It's great that there are these fabulous resources. We might need to, maybe when we upload the podcast, if we could add a few, because I'm sure that teachers listening would really love to be able to have a look at
Definitely. Be very happy to pull that all together for everyone.
That would be that would be really, really, I mean, obviously the book has pretty much everything you need, but I think there are other resources that teachers are always looking when they have time.
Exactly.
For reliable resources more than anything. Having it broken down and made age appropriate means means a lot, particularly at primary level. Could you just share an example of a successful interdisciplinary approach to incorporating climate change and sustainability into educational curricula?
So I'm going to go back to my nature connectedness project, actually, because that had many different layers of thinking, and it did incorporate different areas of the curriculum. So it was a really good example of how different areas of the curriculum can be used to kind of connect up to form conversations in the area. So like I said, it was an art-based approach. So children kind of had a whole range of different ideas linking to art, sort of sculptures. They took photographs, etc., and they observed and they noted those ideas down. So they built their literacy skills by speaking and actually writing detailed information about the different episodes of learning that happened as a result of that as well. There was a design and technology element to the actual project as well, because I mentioned the bee sculpture earlier. I might sort of add a photograph of that at the end so people can actually see it. But that was conceptualized through getting children to design dens, so dens in nature, and then different kind of elements of that in terms of the robustness of those particular structures was used later on in the design of the bee as well. And one of the really key elements of that particular project was children kind of designing and developing their own curriculum content. So they did that through open conversations with each other in kind of focus groups that we led, but they facilitated. We kind of, we were the facilitators, but they led them themselves essentially. They did lots of kind of, mind mapping, so developing kind of skills of writing and thinking about their ideas and what that will look like as curriculum content as well. And then they actually, developed kind of instructional information for each activity that they developed as a result of that. And the final kind of crescendo of that activity was getting them to incorporate kind of IT skills essentially, and kind of they created their own videos of instructions for each of those different activities, and that was the kind of longevity of that particular project. And as I said, that project was very much kind of conceptualizing getting children to think about their well-being and actually feel more comfortable with understanding the climate crises and actually knowing different elements of things that they can do in order to make some change as well. And that particular work was inspired by the work of Professor Nicola Walsh, who is the Executive Director of the Climate Centre at UCL, where she talks about this idea of eco-capabilities and the different capabilities that children can develop if we support them in connecting with nature and what that might look like. So the project kind of drew upon that kind of research and got them to and we were able to highlight some of the key capabilities that the children developed as a result of that as well. So hopefully I've been able to kind of give some examples of the different kind of skills that the children developed.
It links quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm a bit conscious of time, and I know that you wanted to talk about decolonization. No, my first question for you would probably be, how can pre-service teachers be supported to start conversations about decolonisation?
This is a really challenging area in terms of what the landscape looks like. And from my own kind of experience, this is not a research, I haven't done research in the area, but through working with teachers and, for example, the maths content that I was working with teachers, and we looked at kind of where we can incorporate sort of elements of decolonisation within the mathematics curriculum. They would feel that they might not be able to have those conversations in school, and what that might look like for embedding those ideas as well. So I think it's really important to kind of get pre-service teachers to think about what schools are doing at the moment. So that's an honest conversation to have with schools, because actually all schools are working in this area in an authentic way to really inform change. And that change comes from perhaps the student body as well. So my advice would be to actually work with your pupils and actually get them to pose some of those questions to them. What would you like to see in the curriculum content, and what might that look like for you as well, and then using those ideas and taking them back in teams and having a discussion around that, and shaping curriculum as a result of that is a really important component, I feel, in quite a complex area, because there's quite a lot of resources that are coming through and emerging in the space of decolonisation. But I personally feel it's got to be done quite authentically from sort of each school's context and what that looks like for them as well.
What does it mean to you?
For me, it means representation. So I need to see myself in the curriculum that I'm learning and the curriculum that I'm teaching. I also see it as an acknowledgement of what the legacy is of colonization, and what that means to different populations in the world, and what that means in a classroom context in modern Britain today. So if we're talking about, let's say, in the primary curriculum, we look at World War II. We look at that in quite significant detail. So actually, World War II was fought by the British Empire. The sort of the empire and absolutely.
Australia is still a colony.
Yeah. So what does that look like, and actually my grandfather fought in World War II, but I never heard about sort of the part that the Indian Army and different groups played in that as well. So I would like to see that, so that the future generation actually can see themselves in the curriculum, and actually can actually acknowledge and move forward with their thinking as a result of that. Because otherwise we're stuck in this space where there is a lot of discussion that doesn't move forward. So I'm not articulating this well, because I find it quite challenging as well, that if we're going to continue to say colonization was wrong, we know that, but I wasn't there when that happened. It can be quite challenging and tricky to hear that. But if we're going to say, okay, well, let's take Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and let's read that and look at how we can reframe our conversations around curriculum content and what that means from a critical perspective. We acknowledge everything that's happened, but we're going to work together as a team, as a collaborative group of colleagues to move things forward. But most importantly, we're going to work with our students to empower and enable them to build those conversations with us as well.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful, and I'm sure our listeners will really, really appreciate having that. I think, how does the book support pre-service teachers to start developing decolonizing practices in their work?
I think there are elements in each chapter which talk about decolonization and what that looks like within that curriculum area, and therefore it really supports trainees to kind of, let's say, mathematics. What does that look like in a mathematics context? And actually, there's a whole plethora of work that has been developed from mathematicians that are not represented in the curriculum, who are from the global south. And actually, let's incorporate all those elements in when we're having those conversations. When we're talking about an element of mathematics like algebra, the origins of algebra are from the Arabic kind of, mathematicians. So those are kind of at a simplistic level, those are the ideas that trainees can look at and start thinking about as well. But then they can use the ideas within the book, within the chapters, and kind of say, oh, I really like that idea, I'm going to try it out. But also, I'm actually going to drill deeper and look at more opportunities in how I can incorporate those ideas. So there are seeds in there that are already sown, but there are also seeds in there that trainees can take away themselves and actually sow and bear fruit as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Nothing. What are your plans for the future?
So, I am working in an exciting department at UCL. My main sort of area of teaching is on the MA in education. I've already kind of started to incorporate the climate change and sustainability work with our MA program. But in addition to that, the work at the Climate Centre, the Centre for Climate Change and Sustainability Education at UCL, is kind of the pivotal piece of work that I'm developing at the moment. So the Teaching for Sustainable Future content that I'm supporting developing. But in addition to that, there are many other kind of projects and opportunities that brings in developing more research in the area to inform practice as well. So I'm sort of trying to conceptualize what subject knowledge looks like from a mathematics lens for climate change and sustainability education. So that a conceptual framing of that. So there's little projects that are in the background and in the foreground as well at the moment, linked to research and linked to sort of content development in the space of climate change and sustainability education.
Wonderful. And should our listeners want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
They can just put my name in a search engine, and hopefully my UCL profile will come up, and my email is there. So
it definitely does. I know it does.
Yeah. So I'm always very happy to for people to get in touch with me and share my thoughts and ideas if I can.
Yeah, and they can maybe share theirs as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, together we can only be stronger. And your book, should they wish to purchase it?
Yes. So the book's available on any sort of platform where you can buy books. So for example, well, obviously it's on Sage's website. You can buy it from Waterstones as well and order it, and it's also available on platforms like Amazon, etc. as well. So if you pop in the search engine the title, there'll be lots of different options, and it will come up. And I hope you really enjoy working with the book and gain lots of insight from it.
I'm sure they will. I was lucky enough to have a copy to prepare for the interview, and
Wonderful.
absolutely just wonderful. And also I think even when you're on a teacher training course, you do get your input, but having something to then, when you've got a question to go back to, and really all the answers to questions are there, aren't they?
Yeah. And the really nice way of kind of that interaction that we've tried to have with the reflective questions, etc. as well. And it was quite you know, personally it was a really kind of tipping moment in my career, really, of, you know, developing the piece of work, and that's why I've dedicated it to 3 mentors who kind of I started my teaching career with. So it was quite a, you know, a moment for me to kind of really develop this piece of work with my colleagues who collaborated with me as well.
No, and just so many different areas, all in one. It's excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. And,
thank you so much.
And it has been, I think we could keep talking for another hour probably. So if you'd like to come back and let us know what's happening a bit further down the track, I'm very, very curious to know. And again, thank you for coming on the show. It's been an absolute delight talking with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jane. I'd love to come back and have another focus, perhaps, just, you know, purely on the centre.
When you finished this batch of research, if you would, that would be wonderful.
That would be lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Live. You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.